The next lesson's titled Adding Depth of Field. This is great for photographers who want to get that special effect of having something very near to the camera in focus, as well as something very far away from the camera. It can be done with multiple images. This particular demonstration is just two. So we have a picture or a layer here of the beach, and the beach is in focus, but if we zoom in here, we'll see that the glass is not in focus. And then there's another image where the glass is in focus, but the beach isn't in focus. And if we turn this on and off, we'll see that they're not aligned. So the first step is to align them. So it's a two-step process. The first one is to select the layers, and if you have multiple layers, you'd want to select all of them. And then you want to go to Edit, Auto Align, and pick Auto and turn these off and say OK. And that shifted this top beach layer over. So now when we toggle it on and off, we'll see that they are in alignment. And here's a tip how you can manually check to see that your layers are in alignment with each other. If you change the blend mode of the top layer, right now it's on normal, and if you click where it says normal and you go down and you pick difference, it will give you a reverse of pixels. And basically, you should see something that's mostly black. If I use my arrow key to nudge this layer over, we'll see where the pixels are now shifting. So as they align right on top of each other, it should go to black. So that's a good way to double check the alignment, because honestly the auto align doesn't always work. When you're done, you need to switch it back to normal. And the final step in this is to auto blend them. So we need to select both layers again, go to Edit, Auto Blend Layers, make sure we have stacked images selected, seamless tones and colors, and say OK. And Photoshop adds what we call layer masks to these. So let's look at the glass layer first. So it's added a mask to show only the parts of this layer that are in focus. And then on the beach layer, it added a different mask to show only the parts of this image that are in focus. And when you combine them together, it looks like you have an extreme depth of field from the glass all the way back to the rocks back here. The duck image is for the lesson Moving Objects with the Content Aware Move Tool. The Content Aware Move Tool is nested with the other healing tools, the spot healing, healing brush, patch, and last we used it for red eye, so that was the one that was selected. So I'm going to switch this to Content Aware Move Tool, and then it's just as simple as drawing out a lasso selection of your object that you want to move, and you actually have an option to move it or copy it. Up here where it says mode, we're on move, but if I picked extend, that would copy it. Now the book tells you to pick move, so I'm going to pick extend so you can see the difference. And I'm going to drag this, let's drag this duck way back here in the background so you can see when it doesn't quite work so well. After you release, you get these handles so that you can scale and rotate it. If I was going to be moving this duck further back away from the camera, it would get smaller. So I want to hold my Shift key down and scale it down so that it looks like it fits in perspective. I'll scale this down a little bit more and move it back here. And then I'm going to click the big check up here. And notice it copied this duck instead of removing it, and it moved it back here. I'll do a deselect with the Command D, and we'll see that it didn't do a very great job because it had a hard time blending the soft grass here for the long tall grass back here. So the content aware move or the content aware extend works best when something is floating in a similar surrounding. So let's pick this duck again and turn this back to move and take it up into this area, and I'll actually scale it down a little bit so that we're not crossing over that longer grass. Scale it down just a little bit more than that, and then pick the check mark. And we'll see that this time it removed it from this space and moved it up here, and it did a fairly decent job of blending it in. So depending on where your object is located in your image, will have a great deal of impact on how well this tool works for you. And one more thing about this lesson that's overlooked in the book is we didn't make a copy of our layer. So we've done a destructive edit. Um, we changed the pixels on the only layer we had. And anytime you do this type of work, you should make a copy of your original layer. Let's go back and see how that would look. So I'm going to go all the way back to the start with my history panel. And then I'll just take this background layer and drag it down to this page icon, which makes a copy of it. So now we have background copy. And now if I select this duck and move it up here and click the check, it's moved position. Let's do a Command D. And I can toggle on and off the visibility and see where it was originally. So this is the workflow that you want to follow anytime you're doing any retouching. The final lesson in Chapter 5 is called Adjusting Perspective in an Image. I think this is the most fun lesson and probably the most challenging as well. Let's start by evaluating the file that is provided to us. There's two layers here. There's a background layer and there's a train layer. If we turn the train layer visibility off, we'll see that their background is just a train track. And the train is floating on top of it, but it doesn't quite fit on the tracks. We are going to use what's called perspective warp to fix that. I'm going to go to Edit, Perspective Warp. And right away, we'll see that a smart filter has been applied to this smart object layer. So the perspective warp is a two-step process. First, you have to create a layout and basically tell Photoshop what the current perspective is. And then you're going to warp the current perspective to match the new perspective. So you have to think of your object as setting inside of a box, and we need to draw out the sides of the box. So the first side we're going to draw out is the long side of the train. And you do that by just dragging out a big rectangle. And basically this is going to represent the side panel. And then we need to create the front of the box, or the front panel for the train. So we'll drag another box out here. Now as soon as I get close, you'll see those lines turn to blue. And that means that they're going to connect to each other. So what we've drawn are two panels of a box. We need to adjust the perspective of these panels to match the current perspective of the train. And that's basically what this message is telling us. First, we have to create these shapes, and then we're going to go to the warp button. I'm going to close out of this and explain what I mean here. Right now, we just have a big rectangle box, but the train is going back in perspective. It's just not the correct perspective. So first, we need to align this side panel to the perspective of the train. And we can do that by just clicking on a corner and dragging it. And as I do this, I'm paying attention to the perspective of the train and the grid line in the box. So that one lines up pretty well. Let's pull this one down and see if we can get it to line up. I'm looking at these lines in the train here, and now this side's off. So maybe I'll pull this one down and pull this one up. And this is where the challenge is, because for this to work effectively, we first need to get the perspective lined up of how the image is currently. So if I pull this down a little bit further and pull this up. So I'm looking at the perspective lines as well as the vertical lines. I'll zoom in on this just a little bit. So if we look at the vertical grid line, it's not lining up with the vertical line of the train. I'll zoom back out so that I can get to my handles here. So I need to pull this back a little bit. Now we'll see those vertical lines are starting to line up, but this perspective line isn't quite there. So let's pull this up further and pull this down Again, paying attention to the vertical lines as well. Maybe move this up a little bit. Now that's getting better. I want to make sure that the train is completely captured inside of this box though. So I want to get as close to the wheels as I can while keeping this in perspective. And that's starting to look pretty good. So we've fixed the perspective of the side panel. Now we have to fix the perspective of the front panel. And we can see this line here and this line here in the train. We need to try and line up the grid line to the current perspective. And this goes back quite a bit in space, so we need to take this up to match that. So I'm taking this grid line and I'm matching the perspective of the front of the train. So what I've done is I've created an imaginary box that the train fits into, and the panels on this box match the current perspective of the train. Once I get these panels of the layout where I'm happy, then we go to step 2. Step 2 is where we warp the train to fit the perspective of the background. So we're going to switch from layout to warp. And now we can pull down the perspective and try and fit it right on this train here. And this takes a little bit of playing until you're happy with the way that it looks. That's starting to look good. Those wheels are sitting on that train track there. I could really stretch this out, make the train longer, larger, and as I adjust the side panel, you'll notice that the front panel will tweak a little bit too. So from here it really is to taste. What looks right, what visually looks right that you're trying to achieve. The other thing that you can do is automatically align either verticals or horizontals. We don't have any horizontals in this image that we would want automatically aligned, but we do have vertical lines. So if we click on this here, it will automatically adjust those verticals. And now it feels to me like the front of the train is too tall compared to the back of the train. So I can take this down a little bit, maybe take this down a little bit and take this up. That's looking pretty good. And once we're done with it, we'll just click the big check, and that makes that committed. And if we turn the smart filter on and off, you can see how we move that down. So this is a very powerful tool that I use often in my composites. And the more you play with it, the more comfortable you'll get with using it.